Welcome to the Myrna Method live stream. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haag. My goal is to bring you impactful nutrition information that can significantly change your life. And in this video, I think this is a life-changing video. I had a patient come to me. She's doing great on the program. It's all about managing those macronutrients, protein, fiber, carbs, and fat, and understanding they have to be at certain percentages to really get it right from a health perspective. She's doing great. Her labs are great. She's losing weight. But her significant other is telling her, hey, listen, this whole business about fats, I'm not agreeing with it. Doing a cup of almonds every day and basically taking 2 or 3 shots of olive oil because he's read that olive oils can significantly help with hearts. Makes a heart healthy diet when you add a lot of olive oil. And basically what I'm going to be showing you in this video, you have to get the whole picture. And healthy fats are healthy, but if you're not eating them a certain way, they're very unhealthy. And I'm going to show you the science why, and I'm going to also bring the studies. So Sam, if you can switch it over to the PowerPoint, let's get it moving. All right, so when we talk about healthy fats, everybody can agree that fats have healthy components to them, but we're not looking at all the facts. And when you look at nutrition, it's not just extrapolating one little ingredient and saying, oh, I'm just going to mega dose on this. It's understanding that that ingredient works in synergy with many other things. And a lot of times it's the synergy that makes the biggest impact. So you have to get all the facts. And a lot of times what you'll see are selective outcomes with selective reporting. Like I said, they'll pull out one specific fact and they'll really blow it up. And I think a perfect example is when we look at some studies. Well, first of all, before we get there, let's go back and talk about what qualifies a healthy fat. A healthy fat, or healthy anything, whether it's protein or fat or fiber or carbs, it's the components that are in them that typically will identify it as being healthy. And fats can have polyphenols, they can have vitamins, minerals in them. They can give it that property of being a healthy food. But you have to take it in synergy with nutrition, with a lot of other facts to really get the full picture on how healthy fats are. So I'm going to use this study, and I just went to the internet like most people do, and it's all over the internet. You know, olive oil can help failing hearts. In this particular study, or this actually article that's referencing a study, which I'm going to take you to that study, says that they found olive oil improved the hearts of rats with heart failure. So I'm sitting here with heart failure thinking, my gosh, I've got to read this article. And the study that was published in a journal, they removed the hearts from the rats, poor little rats, with heart failure to study the effects of the fat on the hearts. And the scientists kept the rat hearts beating as they removed it from the rats. I'm not really sure how that worked out. But anyways, they treated it with oleic acid, which is a fat, which is a monounsaturated fat, and also with palmitate fat. So these two fats, they treated these pumping hearts that they removed from the rats, and they found that it was a positive effect. So I decided, well, I'm going to actually click into the study. Clicking into the study, what I found is that it says right here that it has cardioprotective consequences from these fats that actually displaced, which means they helped remove, or they had, I'd have to go more into the study, but the real driver here is they're talking about how these fats helped with lipid toxicity, especially in regards to the ceramide species. So to me, that's really where the big news is. So they were focusing on the olive oil, the particular type of fat in the olive oil as being protective to the heart. And that's what this people that reading the study came away from. And then I looked at the Cleveland Clinic, and they're really touting the whole thing on fats. Article just pulled up from, internet like anybody would do. And they're talking about extra virgin olive oil is a critical component for the Mediterranean diet. And I'm going to click into that study. But in this particular article, they really gave a lot of hype to extra virgin olive oil and how it improves chronic inflammation, and it plays really a positive role in the death of cancer cells. And this particular person from the Cleveland Clinic is referring to recommending 1 to 3 tablespoons per day of olive oil. And that's really significant because I'm going to show you the science that 1 tablespoon of olive oil may be okay, but 3 tablespoons for some people could actually not be so good. But then I clicked on the study, and this is what I wanted to show you. The study is referring to the amount of oil, particularly they're saying a half a tablespoon, and they're also referring to a half a tablespoon of butter. And when you're looking at oil or you're looking at fat, it's really relative to the amount, not so much the type of fats. I mean, granted, saturated fats are going to be a little more harmful than an unsaturated, but at the end of the day, even healthy fats in excess can be a real problem. And this study clearly talks about the amount where they reference a half a tablespoon, and here they talk about 10 grams, which is again is a little over a half a tablespoon. And the conclusions in this study references that higher olive oil intake was associated with a lower risk of total cause specific mortality, replacing margarine, butter, mayonnaise, dairy fat. So they're basically, anybody reading this, they're going to go, wow, what I took away from this is higher olive oil intake was associated with a lower risk regarding total mortality. So I'm going, of course, this is going to be positive. And they're also recommending it from the Mediterranean diet. The problem is they're not really giving you the full story. And of course, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. There's the low-carb diets, the keto diet. And there's a lot of reasons why, and I discuss it in my podcast, why some people might have some short-term benefits on the keto or low-carb diet. But it really comes down to understanding how to eat and understanding these macronutrients play a role, in particularly fat. So we're going to talk about excess fat, which is called lipid toxicity, how it causes metabolic imbalances. Some of these metabolic imbalances are diabetes, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, obesity, vascular inflammation. By the way, these are the biggest killers right now in our country. These are at epidemic levels. And lipid toxicity is right at the forefront, meaning too much fats. Where do fats come from? Well, they're either going to come from too much body fat or too much dietary fat. So let's get right into it and start out with some of the basic ones that they're really affecting when we're looking at metabolic diseases. The gut, the artery wall, and the metabolism, specifically insulin receptors. So those are the ones I'm going to really focus on in this video, with the whole premise that fat toxicity is from too much fat in circulation, from either too much dietary fat or too much body fat. This releases fatty acids that can cause a whole heap of problems. Let's start with the gut. High-fat diets can affect the gut, particularly with the gut messaging with the brain. First of all, a high-fat diet increases bad gut bacteria. These bad bacteria can leave the intestinal tract, and they can circulate in other areas and cause damage in other tissue. They can also go up the brainstem and contribute to altering food behavior choices. So what can happen is you eat a diet of high fat and you actually have behavior choices that you want to keep replicating that type of diet. Because these bacteria can travel from the gut to the brain. They want to stay alive. They signal to the brain and the hypothalamus that you need to keep continuing to eat a high-fat diet so they can continue to stay alive. The problem is that these bad bacteria travel to other areas of the body. They can also decrease gut digestion and motility. Also, they have a problem when they're in high levels, the high-fat diet, it has a problem in decreasing short-chain fatty acids, which are healthy gut chemicals that go to other areas of the body and produce health benefits. So immune cells, neuronal cells, a lot of cells in our body have receptor sites specific to these short-chain fatty acids. And when you have a high-fat diet, you have less of these produced in the gut. So high-fat diet, not so great for the gut. And there's some studies that support that. And by the way, when you have these gut changes, they're seeing association with chronic diseases. So in this study, it talks about emerging literature that is implicating a high-fat diet with an alteration in the gut microbiota. This we see with a lot of obesity. And what it does, it leads to an increase of Firmicutes, which are the bad bacteria, and a decrease of the good bacteria, the Bacteroides. So what we're seeing with a high-fat diet is a switch in that microbiota from a lot more bad gut bacteria than good. And it talks about how this can change, and I thought this was particularly interesting and why I pulled it, is that within 3 to 5 days, you can totally change your gut landscape. That to me is crazy. So that means by changing our diet, we can literally change the bacteria in our gut, which means we're going to get a lot of good bacteria that will travel through the body instead of the bad ones. Also, we've got to look at how this can affect other driving forces with disease. This study talks about how current literature supports an influence of gut microbiota on cardiovascular disease. Diet-induced atherosclerosis, which is plaque progression, is associated with an altered gut microbiota. Okay, so the point I'm saying is a high-fat diet can alter that gut microbiota. And this study's showing, when you have that gut bacteria not in good favor, then you are going to be at a greater risk for atherosclerosis, which is plaque forming in the arteries. They also show, again, that studies show in the second area that's highlighted, the link between a high-fat induced dysbiosis, which means a lot of gut problems with bad bacteria, that's what that dysbiosis is, and insulin resistance. So they're showing that these bacteria can also show up in different chronic conditions. Cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, and they show that mice fed a high-fat diet, typically those that were diabetic or diabetic resistant, displayed a gut profile that was specific to having this chronic condition. Also, this study references how the gut microbiota is also involved in certain cancers. Once again, this is gut gone wrong. A lot of bad bacteria, maybe a lack of short-chain fatty acids, because these compounds help bring health properties into our body. So all of a sudden you're doing a high-fat diet and your gut microbiota is changing. So if we're looking more into the gut microbiome, we can see that it can cause food addiction, because your body kind of gets used to these foods, comfort foods, foods that you want to eat because it makes you feel good. And this is that gut-brain connection that can also go on. It also happens with sugar as well, I want to mention. And also the effects of dietary fat on the gut microbiota in this study, and fecal metabolites and the relationship with cardiometabolic risk factors. Basically, what they're saying here, its top line, is that the concentration of total short-chain fatty acids was significantly decreased in a higher fat diet group, meaning these compounds that normally would go to make other cells perform better, like immune cells, neuronal cells, when you have less of them, then the cells do not have as high of a health property. And high-fat diet decrease the amount of these made in the gut. I do want to mention that short-chain fatty acids are also made in the liver. They're made in the liver, and they also are made in the gut. The conclusion with this study is that a higher fat consumption by healthy young adults whose diet is in a state of nutrition transition appeared to be associated with unfavorable changes in the gut microbiota. and also in the metabolic profiles. When I talk about the metabolic profiles, I'm really zeroing in on a lot of these metabolic diseases, and also plasma pro-inflammatory factors, which we're going to get to some of those now. But basically, they're saying that it caused adverse consequences long term, right? And I also want to mention that you don't know this is going on for a lot of people. They don't know that this biochemical process, they're eating these almonds and they're really taking in a lot of these olive oils. And these are healthy fats, but in excess, not so good. So let's talk about insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes and how excess fatty acids, and the two places fatty acids come from is either from eating too much dietary fat, releases fatty acids in the bloodstream, or you just have too much body fat, and this releases fatty acids in the bloodstream. These fatty acids begin to accumulate in non-fat tissue. So fatty acids are supposed to be in fat tissue, right? That's where you store most of the fats. But when they're in excess, they can begin to accumulate in non-fat tissue, like muscle tissue. And excess fatty acids that accumulate in muscle cells in excess, that's the big word, in excess, they change properties and they become a type of fat called a ceramide. And if we go back to that study on the olive oil, they actually made reference to these ceramide fats. To me, that's the hot news. That these ceramides are things that people aren't really talking about. It's coming from excess fatty acids that accumulate into fat cells from too much body fat, too much dietary fat. And what happens is these ceramides, these fats, begin to clog the receptor site where the insulin attaches. So let's talk about that. Every time you eat a carbohydrate from the gut, enters the bloodstream, your body releases insulin, and the main goal of insulin is to attach to a receptor site that sits on muscle cells. Also, we have receptor sites on brain cells, because believe it or not, there's certain neuronal cells in the brain that want sugar, actually need sugar. Same with muscles. What happens is this receptor site becomes clogged with too much excess fatty acids, and now the message to bring the transporter to the surface of the cell doesn't happen. When insulin attaches to that receptor site, the whole idea is it's messaging the cell to allow the sugar inside the muscle cell. When this is clogged, that doesn't happen. The blood sugar begins to build outside the muscle cell, trying to get in, cannot, and that sugar ends up in a fat cell. And that's where we can get an excess of belly fat, which is usually a sign of insulin resistance. But what I'm trying to bring home here is that the excess fatty acids that are accumulating because you're doing a cup of almonds and maybe 3 tablespoons of olive oil because you're under the belief that these healthy fats are okay, that we can do an excess of them and everything's going to work out well. They do have healthy compounds in them, but not in excess. It doesn't work out well. So that's an example where that's a type 2 diabetes. That's what insulin resistance is. It starts out with maybe 30 or 40% of the receptor sites clogged. Next thing you know, you're up at 50 to 60%, and you are a type 2 diabetic. In the brain, this is called type 3 diabetes, also known as Alzheimer's. Once again, when it has an excess fatty acids, you have these ceramides that get involved in that receptor site in the brain, and it's not receptive anymore. It's resistant to insulin action. This is type 3 diabetes, just like with type 2 in the muscle cell, also known as Alzheimer's. So we look at some studies in regards to this, and this is really when they're referring to lipid toxicity, they're referring to how it affects these metabolic processes. And this study talks about the skeletal muscle and the lipid deposits and how it causes insulin resistance. It says mounting evidence indicates that elevated intramyocellular triglycerol concentrations are associated with diminished insulin sensitivity in skeletal muscles. This lipid accumulation, which is fat, is most likely due to enhanced fatty acid uptake into the muscle. This is lipid oxidation. And they talk about in the bottom half highlighted area, which I think is interesting, they're making note here, and it's really worth talking about how, excess calories. So you could be on a low-fat diet and just eating too much. There you go. Excess body fat, because that's what's going to happen. You gain weight. So either you're going to get these excess fatty acids because you're just too doggone fat, regardless of what you're eating, or too much dietary fat because you didn't understand, as they mention here, the dietary guidelines for Americans have shown to increase the risk, not having consistency. So this study shows that the inconsistency with the recommendations outlined the dietary guidelines, which means how much protein, fiber, carbs, and fat we need in our diet. This can increase the risk for insulin resistance. So clearly, too much dietary fats, get too fat because you're just eating too much food, or don't follow the dietary guidelines for the amount of fat you do need. All of this can lead to lipid toxicity, affecting the gut, affecting type 2 diabetes, the muscles, because of this lipid toxicity. And it also is a hallmark for insulin resistant, this excess lipid accumulation in muscles, where you get this ceramide influx. And it also is not good for the heart. In this study, it talks about finally, accumulation of fat in the heart has been associated with cardiac dysfunction and heart failure, which may be explained for some diabetic cardiomyopathy. So here you go, guys. Okay? Again, when you're talking about these excess fats that accumulate where they shouldn't be, it can cause harm. Specifically, in this study, once again, they're highlighting lipid accumulation in non-adipose tissue. They refer to it as lipid toxicity. And where is this taking place? Primarily is in the muscle. But they're also referring that it can take place in other places like the pancreas and the heart and even in the liver, because we can get the fatty liver as well. So bottom line, what I'm trying to bring home here is that I get it. Almonds are healthy. Avocados are healthy. Olive oil. All these things have healthy compounds in them, which is what makes them healthy fats. But you have to look at the big picture and understand in nutrition, it's not just about having healthy compounds in foods, but it's how you work the entire diet together. In this study, it talks about how high-fat diets increase oxidative stress. And we'll talk about that because oxidation is what happens with these fats, especially in the vascular system. But they talk about here how the role of high-fat diets promoting oxidative stress. So actually eating a diet higher in fat promotes this oxidation that can lead to neurodegeneration, which is up in the brain. It can also lead to type 2 diabetes. And what we're going to focus on next is the vascular system. So let's jump right there and talk about how these fats in excess, and the big word is excess, affect the vascular system. So here's the artery, and inside the artery wall, we have a lot of fats that can tend to localize. You have your LDL, these are some of your bad cholesterols, you have some trans fats, and there you go, we even have our ceramide fats. All these fats are called atherogenic fats. And why are they called that? Because when they get in the artery, these reactive oxygen species begin to oxidize these fats. And that's just a compound the body does, just a chemical compound the body does, this oxidation. But why I'm explaining to you why it's important is because it's the excess fats that accumulate in the artery wall that become oxidized. It's like the perfect storm, and they produce this fatty substance in the wall. And this fatty substance, as it grows, is what people are referring to as plaque in the artery, and it can thicken, it can narrow the opening to the arteries. A lot of people will need stents. It can calcify, so it can get hard and then more soft plaque on top. It can dislodge and cause a heart attack or stroke. And all of this is coming from excess fats. Now, the right amount of fat, really good, because we want to get the right amount of fat so we can get the benefit of getting all the good properties in the olive oils and the avocados. And just because they're a healthy fat, it looks that excess is what we have to look at. So there's just other studies. I can run through some of them. This one in particular talks about atherosclerosis, which is the thickening of that layer in the arteries. And this is all due to accumulation of fat, which right here in the study, it talks about that the accumulation of fat, the fatty material is located in the central core of the plaque and is covered by a fibrous cap. But the term atherosclerosis, which is referring to this plaque progression, is in parentheses, it states right there, it is two parts. It's an accumulation of fat accompanied by several macrophages, which are immune cells, which are actually responsible for creating the plaque from the accumulated fat. So basically, the big take-home here is I think there's reason that we have to look at the macronutrients and our percentages to really get nutrition right. Sure, it's important to get healthy compounds, but also important to understand nutrition works in several facets, not just extrapolating one thing and then going to the internet and believing that you're doing 3 or 4 tablespoons of olive oil, it's a good thing, because it's really not. There's a reason why the body wants you to keep a certain percentage of protein, fiber, carbohydrates, and fat. It's not just what you think you should have. There's actually science behind this. And in this video, I wanted to bring the science behind why too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So how much fat do you need? Well, it's a real easy equation. You take your ideal body fat and you divide it by 3. That's going to give you approximately 25%. A good percentage is anywhere from 25 to 35%. That's the recommended daily allowance. How do you get to that? Well, percentage doesn't mean a doggone thing. You have to change it to grams, because this is what you're going to see on food labels, and this is how you do it. Second question is, what is my ideal body weight? Good question. So I'll let you freeze the screen if you want to look at the formula, but it's super easy. For women, for every inch over 5 feet, you add 5 pounds to 100 pounds. For men, it's 6 pounds every inch over 5 feet, and you add it to 106 pounds. That'll give you an estimation. That's going to be your leanest weight, but you can easily add maybe 10, 15 pounds to that and still be within a good BMI. So that's the formula, and it's real easy to do. Once you get that divided by 3, that's going to give you 25% of your daily value of fat. You can easily add 20 grams to that and still be at 35%. So for a female who's, let's say, 5'4", her ideal body weight's 120. So her fat grams are going to be 40 to 60 grams for the day, approximately. So that's it. That's the amount she needs. So if we start looking at foods and looking at the recommendation, and we're looking, wow, if she actually had 3 tablespoons of oil, that's 45 grams. And that's without eating anything else. And that's what they're recommending for a heart-healthy scenario with the Mediterranean diet. Or maybe she decided to do 3 tablespoons of oil because she heard it was so good for her, and then she did an avocado on top of it, and of course then she did her cup of nuts because they're all healthy fats. She would be well over 90 to 100 grams of fat, which could be a real problem because of all the reasons I just explained. So avocados are good. Oil has good properties. I'm just saying there is a reason why dietitians get licenses to practice nutrition and they're told why scientifically these macronutrients have a purpose. Now, there's a lot of different foods within these macronutrients, and we can talk about all the different benefits of the food. But bottom line, this is what a balanced diet looks like, understanding how these macronutrients work. And it's significant, especially when it comes to carbohydrates and fat. Understanding how those two are balanced in your diet, super important. In this video, I wanted to really bring home that understanding that fats are good, they have good properties, but too much, getting beyond your daily amount, can affect the gut in a bad way, can increase excess fatty acids that accumulate in places they shouldn't, which is the culprit for type 2 and type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's, and can also contribute to a lot of plaque buildup in the arteries. So the takeaway in this video was I just wanted to bring home the idea that knowing how much fat you need is super important. Also, I just want to kind of highlight that fat cells in themselves, so two ways you release excess fatty acids. You're either too fat, too many enlarged fat cells, or you're eating too much dietary fat. But even if you're eating a low-fat diet and you're just eating too much, and that can trigger you to eat too much because it can trigger insulin response, and that's a whole nother video. But bottom line, too much fat is a chronic inflammatory condition. It triggers tumor necrosis factor, immune cells, not favorable. It also increases more reactive oxygen species. We saw those in the lining. These are not so good because these also oxidize fats and create a damaging fat. So too much body fat, not so good, right? Because of all of the release of these fatty acids that have inflammatory implications. Oxidative stress increases also with the diet. So I hope this helps. Also, I want to mention that I have a book out on Amazon that actually explains how you balance your diet using protein, fiber, carbs, and fat in your meals. Important in your meals, also important for the end of the day. So you can do a quick read on it and find out how it all works, or you can just stay tuned to all my podcasts, and I'm going to give it to you, obviously, in bits and pieces. Also, you can go to my website. I have a membership where I help people understand how to eat a balanced diet to maintain your leanest and healthiest weight. So I wanted to leave it open in the chat if anybody had any questions.
No questions, but we reached a milestone.
Okay, we did?
You're over 700.
Woo! Thank you guys, 700 followers. So appreciate it. Milestone. Love what I do. And most importantly, I love helping you live your leanest and healthiest with nutrition. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks, Sam. Okay, thank you, and I'll see you next week.